Come, let us explore how our beliefs could block our growth. This morning, this teaching will be based upon the 16th passage of the 16th of 28 passages of the meditation classic Great Garuda in Flight, composed oh so many centuries ago, by more than 1,000 years ago, I'm not sure, my math might be off, but many centuries ago, by the great Buddhist reformer Prahe Vajra. There is no enlightenment. Even the name enlightenment does not exist. It is an error to assign a name in order to point out enlightenment. Hoping to attain enlightenment from others is a mistaken path, as there is not even the slightest trace of a teaching on the formless experience. So there are two ways to look at this, conventionally and ultimately. Let us begin by looking at this conventionally. To do that, I'm going to have to rely upon a set of visual aids. Both this teaching text and the visual aids are available for free downloads as PDFs. As we go through life, despite what emotion we feel, there are different guiding lights we can use, metaphorically speaking. We can be guided by our amygdala, the seat of anxiety and aggression, or we can be guided by our anterior cingulate gyrus, the seat of empathy. Sturgeon's law reminds us that 90% of everything sucks. The 90% of people, including 90% of meditation teachers, are going to be guided by fear. They're going to not only be rigid, fearful, superstitious, controlling, elitist, cryptic, competitive, and cruel, but they're going to think that's the way to be, and anything else is bad. I know, it's weird, isn't it? About 10% are going to be guided by empathy. And they're going to find themselves increasingly more and more flexible, loving, rational, laid back, egalitarian, lucid, cooperative, and kind. Those who are guided by fear, those who are elitist and competitive, will tell us all types of unpleasant stories, things that path to enlightenment is gradual and so difficult, its journey is longer than the lifetime of the individual, no less, even 3 times longer than the life cycle of a universe. However, the Buddha said that enlightenment was simply getting so good at the Eightfold Path that we practice it spontaneously, habitually, easily, and effectively. And that according to his discourse on the 4 bases of mindfulness, in the second to the last section, he explained that one could master this path in as little as 7 days. So on the path of fear, they have ridiculous claims, like you have to do magic, you have to walk through walls, you have to be able to fly, you have to do parlor tricks. There are certain emotions you can never feel, there's certain thoughts you can never think. The Buddha said no. The 7th fold of the Eightfold Path is mindfulness. The first enlightenment factor, is also mindfulness. We got to be vulnerable to the full spectrum of human experience, to the full spectrum of human perceptions, emotions, intentions, thoughts, memories, and imaginings. And the only way to do this is for us to practice mindfulness vulnerably, passively, viscerally, randomly, and fleetingly, which is the opposite of the rigidity that says concentrate. Focus on one thing and shove everything away, or focus on no thing and repress everything else. That's not what the Buddha taught. The Buddha did not teach us to exhaust ourselves with pseudo-intellectual philosophies or lowbrow blind faith. He taught us merely to, well, let's put it this way. We're taught that every time we inhale, we are wired to automatically access the middle part of our spinal cord, described as the locus or of the sympathetic nervous system. And it evolved to help us to effortlessly notice vulnerably, passively, viscerally, randomly, and fleetingly, to notice mind's antics of seeing, hearing, feeling, smelling, tasting, and the like, including the full spectrum of human emotions, intentions, cognitions, recollections, and imaginations. Not to pick and choose, but to be perfectly vulnerable to all manner of phenomena, from the external to the internal, from the physical to the mental, from the pleasurable to the painful, from the interesting to the boring, from the glorious to the grotesque. What are we to do with that which we noticed? Every time we exhale, we have evolved to automatically access the end bits of our spinal cord, kind of like bookends on a shelf. This is known, the fancy name for this would be the locus of our parasympathetic nervous system, or there's another word I was using yesterday. It probably will come to me later. But nexus? Anyway, let's continue. This parasympathetic nervous system has evolved to help us to physically relax and mentally release to such a degree that which we noticed during our previous inhalation could fleetingly feel less stressful, less permanent, and even less defining. The operative word is fleeting, because in a few moments, once we breathe in again, the cycle begins afresh. This is the enlightenment the Buddha offers us. It's very, very simple. Now, if you are into egalitarianism, whoopee, yippee, that's great. If you are into elitism, that sucks. It's tough to really feel, in elitism, we feel good by making others feel bad. And so if that's what we're doing, and it's really easy for people to accomplish what we've accomplished, then we're going to be, bummed out. But if we're egalitarian, and if we want everyone to be peaceful and loving, then we're going to be tickled pink that this is easy and available for everybody. Now, I promised you there would be that in addition to a conventional view of the text, we'll take an ultimate view of the text. Before we do that, I think it could be helpful for us to review this morning's teaching text. As there is no enlightenment, even the name enlightenment does not exist. It is an error to assign a name in order to point out enlightenment. All complex life forms on this planet have evolved to think symbolically. Our distant pre-human ancestors first perceived, and then in time they began recalling past perceptions and then anticipating future perceptions, i.e. imagining, and that became the scaffolding upon which the modeling clay of the profound cognitive processes that we become accustomed to were placed. Therefore, it should come as little surprise that in every human civilization we find the widespread use of figures of speech. It's how we are wired. These figures of speech also apply to meditation. As we relax into our exhalation, whatever we noticed during our previous inhalation could fleetingly feel as non-graspable as, and you know it's a simile if they got the word as in here, as non-graspable as a vast empty void. Now, a simile is only as effective as it is relatable, so we have to ask, what? What is a real-world example of a non-graspable vast empty void? How about the illusion of the infinite azure sky on a bright and beautiful cloudless morn, which, although could be tantalizing to the eye, feels non-graspable to the hand? So, despite the ravings of those who are rigid, fearful, superstitious, controlling, elitist, cryptic, competitive, and cruel, emptiness and voidness and vastness and openness are just metaphors for the fleeting experience of letting go available during each exhalation. And while we're here, I think it could be useful to remind you that the easiest way to practice mindfulness, which is simply noticing mind's antics, is to silently and mentally recite the one-syllable verb watch every time we feel our lungs swell as we inhale. And similarly, the essence of meditation, which is simply relaxing into mind's non-graspable nature, is to silently and mentally recite the one-syllable verb rest each time we feel our lungs subtly sink as they gently exhale. Now let's return to this morning's teaching text. It is an error to assign a name in order to point out enlightenment. One of the many fringe benefits of training in mindfulness and meditation once every 12 hours or so is that our choices and utterances and deeds begin to flow, not from the extreme of calculated contrivance or the other extreme of complete scatteredness, but from the midpoint of centered spontaneity. This could be flow. This could be described as wu wei, effortless action, or non-action. This could be described as expedient means. But here's the irony. The moment we ask, am I in the flow? We're not in the flow. Ironic, is it not? Similarly, the Buddha already taught. Well, I skipped a part, so let's go back here. Let's go back to button 9 from the visual aids. So I mentioned that in the penultimate passage of the Satipatthana Sutta, the Buddha taught that one could master the Eightfold Path in as little as 7 days. That's incredible. How do we know that works? Simple. Because of the lazy bastard path to enlightenment, simply by playing with mindfulness and meditation, the remaining 6 folds of the path, the ability to notice change, the ability to flow from effortless effort, the ability to feel kindness of intention and communication and conduct and even commerce, tip that waiter, is the effortless byproduct of mindfulness and meditation. Our only goal, our only task is when we sit in meditation to silently and mentally recite the verb watch as we inhale, and silently and mentally recite the verb rest as we exhale. And then we enjoy the show. We enjoy the sights, sounds, sensations, flavors, scents, emotions, intentions, thoughts, memories, and imaginings that cartwheel across the stage of our mind. We could experience the external or the internal, or the physical or the mental, or the pleasurable or the painful, or the interesting or the boring, or the glorious or the grotesque. Whatever comes up, our response is the same. Watch and rest. Whether it's interesting or boring or glorious or grotesque or pleasurable or painful, we watch and rest. That's it. When I was a little boy, I noticed in my cousin's house, in the molding at the doorway, I think it's molding, is that the right term? Anyway, the molding in the doorway of the kitchen, my aunt had um, measured the height of my cousins, and next to each line there was a date and a name, which I thought was rather sweet. You could kind of watch a representation of the growth of my cousins, who were 7 years older than me, and between me and my sister, there were gods among men. um, and that's fine for measuring children or shoes, feet in a store when you want to buy shoes, but it doesn't work for spiritual growth because the path is so simple and so automatic. See, here's the thing. It would be useful to have a metric if this was a conscious presence process dependent upon our overindulgence for dorsolateral and medial prefrontal cortex, but it's not. Since it's just a passive process involving our spinal cord, since all we're doing is going along for the ride, then measuring it will pull us out of our passive state and into our active state. We have a choice. What is that choice, you might ask? We can actively compete against our autonomic nervous system, or we can passively cooperate with it. That's the only game in town. Actively measuring takes us out of passive cooperation. That was even echoed in quantum physics, where the act of measuring quantum information alters quantum information. And I'm really grateful for Neil deGrasse Tyson, who has demystified that process. It's not about the power of awareness, it's the power of photons, really. And the like. So many centuries ago, before the idea of quanta, subatomic particles, was even a thing, they recognized the folly of actively measuring a passive process. Think of it this way. Let's get trenchant, shall we? Actively measuring a passive process is like making love in the name of virginity. Oh, sure, it's a fun way to spend a Saturday afternoon, but it's going to take you further away from your stated goal. So let's not do that. And again, let's return to this morning's teaching text. Okay, here we go. Hoping to attain enlightenment from others is a mistaken path, as there is not even the slightest trace of a teaching on the formless experience. So there's two ways to look at this. They're both conventional. So, way number one. We cannot concentrate our way to nirvana. We cannot concentrate our way to nirvana. We cannot contemplate our way to our nirvana. We can only notice, we can only watch and rest our way to nirvana. We cannot attain mastery of the autonomic nervous system by relying upon the prefrontal cortex. We can only attain mastery of our autonomic nervous system by cooperating with our autonomic nervous system. We can think of Buddhism in terms of institutional Buddhism and proto-Buddhism. In institutional Buddhism, you can find books to tell you how to ape the symptoms of Satori. And nine times out of 10, people's Satori experiences are exactly the same. Similarly, in Pentecostalism, you can find books to tell you how to contrive the spontaneous act of speaking in tongues. Once again, it's like making love in the name of virginity. So, those things do not serve us. The path the Buddha offers us is mastery. It's upon our autonomic nervous system, which is so central to enlightenment that the ancient masters have referred to this work as our Buddha nature. The Buddha nature that automatically calms our cowardly, cranky, and competitive amygdala, and automatically stimulates our anterior cingulate gyrus, which functions as the hub of our mirror neurons, the seat of contentment and cooperation and compassion. So, in a nutshell, we cannot rely on the prefrontal cortex to master the autonomic nervous system. Now you might say, dude, are you telling me to just lobotomize myself and never focus and never analyze? No. Well, then how are we to know what the sustainable way is of focusing and analyzing? Simple. The more we practice mindfulness and meditation, the more we will experience the effortless effort of centered spontaneity. Flowing from centered spontaneity is the only way to not only safely use the front of our head, not only sustainably use the front of our head, but to use the front of our head with peak efficiency. When we read the autobiographies of Nobel laureates, they almost always say the same thing. After years of living in the front of the head to master the language and the mechanism of science and chemistry and physics, when it comes time to actually apply them to the cutting edge of human knowledge, there's a point where the front of the brain just fails them, and they have to rely on creativity. Now, it's not a blind creativity. They have a creative insight that they test analytically. But Einstein insisted that creativity was intelligence at play. In other words, we have the brain of our belly and the brain of our brow. Both are required, just as a bird requires both its wings to take to the skies. We need both our belly and our brow working in cooperation, not working adversarially. The only way to do that, sustainably, and efficiently is by operating from the centered spontaneity that is the effortless byproduct of mindfulness and meditation. Going back to the autobiographies of Nobel laureates, this is why so many of them said, well, let's echo the words of the movie 15 Minutes. You cannot come back to a problem unless you first walk away. And so when we consult those autobiographies, we read time and time again that these great men and women of science would walk away from the problem, maybe make love, maybe take a nap, maybe go see a movie, maybe go exercise, maybe all of the above, have a real red letter day. And then, boom, when they're relaxed and refreshed, a fresh insight comes to them that they're able to drop into the metaphoric coffee grinder of empirical science. So, to quote Yoda from The Empire Strikes Back, don't think, feel. Now let's look at it from another point of view. And so I'm going to refresh your memory to the best of my ability. Hoping to attain enlightenment from others is a mistaken path. I remember when I was a novice monk at a Zen center, Huan, the Chinese pronunciation, the Spanish pronunciation, said to me, when you attain enlightenment, give it to me. As if we were playing some sort of metaphysical scavenger hunt. And whether I was dealing with Mahayana people or Tantrayana people, there was still the flypaper of patriarchy that said, rely on a teacher, and they will use their magic to enlighten you. This author, recognized by the entirety of the Nyingma sect of Tibetan Buddhism as the greatest Dzogchen teacher, said, that's poo-poo caca. That's malarkey. Don't do that. The purpose of the outer teacher is to point out the inner teacher. The inner teacher is simply our ability to notice and relax. I've already told you all you need to know to master the Buddha's path. Not because I'm awesome, but because the path is easy. Consider the words of Einstein. Any educated fool can make things more difficult, more complicated, and more violent. However, it takes a lot of courage and a little bit of genius to move in the opposite direction. Where the Buddha's foolish cousin delighted in making things difficult, the Buddha himself delighted in making things easy. He already went through the difficult path. He used every physical and circumstantial and mental advantage he had and explored every path and found that the most powerful path was the easiest and the shortest and the most pleasurable. That's why he taught that the fourth enlightenment factor was joy. And that is the essence of this morning's opening lesson. We can now shift gears. It is yet a Monday morning. Come, let us meditate like a Jedi. After approximately 30 seconds of housekeeping, this is the Dzogchen Sunday Lama Jigme Gyatso of the Buddha Joy Meditation School. For more than 30 years, I have harnessed my autistic special interests, as well as my ADHD hyperfocus, to spend about 8 hours a day, almost every day, studying, practicing, mastering, and reverse engineering the teachings and techniques of each school of meditation so that I can become your personal, nerdy, neurodivergent guide to nirvana. Welcome, my friends, to Meditate Like a Jedi, which is made possible due to the generosity of viewers just like you. For the remainder of this morning's live stream, let's practice. Silently and mentally reciting the verb watch as we breathe in, and silently and mentally reciting the verb rest as we breathe out. If you, like me, are prone to arthritis, you may wish to adjust your legs every 15 minutes or so. The moment you have a specific question about Buddhist meditation or philosophy, do not hesitate to type your question in great detail in the chat window, for I tend to check for questions about every 5 minutes or so. A question, let's see here. A concern is brought up. What do I do if I am meditating and my mind is just totally lethargic? What should I do? How should I fix it? Don't fix it. As you breathe in, notice the lethargy. As you breathe out, relax. If you're too lethargic to sit up, then adjust the variables in your life. That's the third enlightenment factor, is adjust the variables in our life so we can have the most energy. Which means simple things like, don't eat junk food. Eat a whole food, cruelty-free vegan diet. That will give you more energy. Do what you can to increase the quality of your sleep at night. When you're tired, rest. When you're hungry, eat. Listen to your body. There will be times that it screams for activity, whether it's taking a brisk walk or knocking out some calisthenics. These things can strengthen our body's ability to sit. But don't fight your body. Go with the flow in the most loving way. What do we do when our mind is too agitated? How do we calm it down? Don't. Sometimes we need to work through agitation. Sometimes we need to work through physical agitation or mental agitation. During mental agitation, just notice, just watch and rest in harmony with your breathing. Our job is not to change what we feel, but to profit from what we feel by watching it and resting through it. When our body's antsy, then it may be time to switch, at least for that hour, to switch from seated meditation to brisk walking meditation, which is exactly the same, although you're just briskly walking. Some people believe in slow motion walking meditation, but those are people trying to control how fast the brain works, which I don't recommend. When your body hungers for activity, give it physical activity. A very famous Chinese meditation master taught in essence, when you're weary, rest. When you're hungry, eat. People are always going to try to control you. People with small penises and big pencils are forever going to try to control you. But the only morality we need is bringing love into the four bases of mindfulness, bringing kindness into our experience of the mental and the interpersonal and the physical and the circumstantial. We do that automatically from our practice of mindfulness and meditation. So it doesn't matter that 100,000 cranky people tell you to only eat one meal a day. They're cranky. If you listen to them, you'll probably be just as cranky as they are. I don't want to be cranky. I don't need help being cranky. I need help being not cranky. And so when I find a teacher who says, hey, rest when you're tired, eat when you're hungry, cowabunga. It's the lazy bastard path of enlightenment. Remember, the Buddha, before the Buddha was the Buddha, when he was just Siddhartha, he experimented with debauchery and asceticism. And they both were inefficient. The quick path to great bliss is the middle path. Using the right tool at the right time, guided by centered spontaneity. In the Sylvester Stallone version of Judge Dredd, there was a cyborg, half man, half machine, with a dial in his forehead, and his terrible, manipulative, coercive father would speak hypnotically to his son and turn the dial to turn his son from a compliant servant into a murder machine. A lot of meditators try to do that with themselves. They do that by trying to manipulate their gaze, their posture, their breathing, their visualizations, their channels, their winds, their drops, their recitations. or we can just walk the path of centered spontaneity. The sun doesn't shine every day. Our energy is not optimized every day. We're not always injury-free every day. Some people transform meditation into a prison cell. Some people say, well, I've got to, feel these feelings emotionally and feel these feelings physically and think these thoughts mentally, and they paint themselves into a corner, constructing for themselves a very, very teeny cage. That's not freedom. That's slavery. The liberation the Buddha offers us is the opportunity to thrive despite the circumstances or our health or our relationships or our mind. Got news for you. Everyone's going to die. If you don't die young, you'll die old. If you die old, you will notice the diminishment of your physical capabilities and some of your intellectual capabilities. It's scary and it's uncomfortable. It doesn't make meditation an impossibility. If liberation is true liberation, it helps us to cope with what Shakespeare described as the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. I've seen Karens of every gender and every ethnic permutation. I've seen Karens who just delight in controlling others. In the delightful comedy, What the Bleep Do We Know? They even did a musical number about Karens finding empowerment through rage. And there are villains who delight in exploiting the vulnerabilities of others. There will be villains, there will be Karens. We cannot flip a switch in a mad scientist's laboratory and make them disappear. So we get to cope with the friends and the fools and the fiends. I live in the United States of America, which went from a slow walk towards fascism to a sprint. There are some people who would say, do nothing, and the path bends towards kindness. But that is not what the founding fathers of my country did when they revolted against Great Britain. That is not what they did during the War of 1812 when Britain tried attacking again. And that's not what they did during the Civil War. That's not what that's not what Martin Luther King did. He spoke out. That's not what Malcolm X did. That's not what Fred Hampton did. They found their ways responding to injustice. The question is not, do we do something or do we do nothing? The question is, do we flow from fear? Are we guided by fear or are we guided by empathy? In the Christian New Testament, in the Gospels, we read Jesus chiding Peter. The words, those who live by the sword die by the sword. But in the Tao Te Ching, we read that there is a time to take up arms, not from blood loss, but to protect others. How do we know what to do, when to do it? By flowing from the centered spontaneity that is driven by awareness and release. There are some people who insist that the fascist politicians and their minions, all the way down to their foot soldiers, are victims of a system that has conditioned the central nervous system towards villainy. And that may be so. They may deserve some empathy. But I'm going to reserve the lion's share of my empathy for their victims. And if I have to protect someone from another, I will protect the victims of fascism from the perpetrators of fascism, even if I just use my aging body as a human shield. Love protects one's neighbors in one's block, one's city, one's continent, one's planet. Who are my neighbors? All living beings. You have taken your first step into a much larger world. If you feel that I have earned it, you could give this live stream a thumbs up. You could even help support this channel. In approximately 10.5 hours, I would very much like to return to lead today's evening meditation class and group practice. And if you are as geeky as me, well, that's weird. I'm having some problems over here. Oh well, I don't always get what I want. If you are as geeky as me, may the Force be with you always.